new mobilization partners who are working to join our June 29th Mass Poor People, Low-Wage Workers Assembly and Moral March on Washington, D.C. and to the polls. In addition to today's national call, we're having simultaneous press conferences across the nation in several states, including Delaware, Indiana, Kentucky, Maryland, Massachusetts, Mississippi, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Texas, and West Virginia. So we'll go ahead and start today with a promo video for the June 29th gathering, and then I'll turn it over to Reverend Barber, who will introduce and speak to some of our impacted speakers who are here today as well.
Somebody's killing poor people, and it's going on. Yeah.
When COVID happened, poor people were dying at a rate already of 800 people a day. Before COVID, if you went to a funeral every single day, it would take you 600 years to attend all the funerals of the people who will die from the ravages of policy violence, poverty, and low wages in America in just 1 year. It would take you 2 years and 19 days to go to all of the funerals of the people that will die today, and oftentimes silence. Nobody talks about this political genocide, but we are determined today to remember their death and be a resurrection of voting power and voice power like never before.
Economic justice and saving this democracy are deeply connected. We, as a nation, must listen to the demands of the poor, who are pushing and will continue to push political candidates and elected leaders to lift from the bottom so that everybody can rise.
We are the poor, the marginalized, and the underpaid. And we are taking one step forward to say that everybody has a right to live.
Poverty is not the fault of those who are impoverished. It is caused by those who make the policy.
There are over 135 million poor and low-wage, low-income people in this nation.
The biggest block of potential voters by far is low-income, low-wage voters.
I can't afford medicine. Sometimes I have to skip because of the cost.
The farm worker community is tired of the violence imposed upon us by greed, exclusion, and denial of basic human rights.
Those folk that represented by that casket, poor and low-wage workers who are the most moral people in this country because they go to work every day believing, even though going to work is hazardous to their health.
I'm tired of working 70 to 80 hours a week and still not have money for the necessity of bills. I'm tired of getting sick and not being able to go see the doctor, having to make a choice to pay between rent or the light bill or food or clothes.
You cannot claim to care about families and a culture of life and then do everything in your power to rob people of equal access to resources and to force them to live in poverty.
Leadership of both parties had waged war on poor people and low-wage workers.
And this government has treated people experiencing poverty, including their military families, with disdainful, deliberate, malicious neglect.
So the truth is that my son died from poverty.
We refuse to accept poverty as the fourth leading cause of death.
The fourth leading cause of death in this, the richest country in the world.
We march today for our children and the generations to come.
And we need to do it with the loudest voices possible, the biggest actions possible.
We will voice our demands and register our vote.
When we stand up and when we stand together, things change.
There is the electorate that is, and then there is the electorate that should be.
34 million eligible poor and low-income voters did not vote in 2016. If just 20% of those voters in swing states were mobilized around an agenda, they could change the political outcome of every election. So we're launching the most massive voter mobilization and turnout campaign in history of poor and low-wage voters, allies, and religious leaders.
People are dying, but we know it doesn't have to be this way. And so we are calling on everyone to join us in this Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival.
We are here, we will be seen, we will be heard, and our power will be felt. We don't need to be an insurrection. We are a resurrection that will be felt across this country. Are you ready? Ready, ready, ready. We are a resurrection, and we are ready.
And we won't be silent anymore.
Powerful, powerful, powerful video. Let me welcome all of the members of the media and others who have joined with us today. My name is Bishop William J. Barber II, President, Senior Lecturer of Repairs of the Breach and co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, along with Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris, and co-chair of Mobilization as we move towards June the 29th, Saturday, June the 29th at 10 o'clock a.m. on 3rd and Pennsylvania for the mass Poor People's Low-Wage Workers Assembly Moral March on Washington that we announced at the National Press Club on March the 2nd. And this is not just a moment, it's not just a gathering, it is the second phase of our launch. We call it in some places Operation Move Millions, where we are seeking to touch, educate, motivate 15 million poor, low-wage, infrequent voters in this country who literally hold so much power that they can change the outcome of elections. Our votes are demands and not merely voting for people. We're inviting everyone to come. And after that day, we're still mobilizing by touching over an 8-week period, more than 15 million poor and low-wage voters. On June 29th, we joined together with partners and anchor groups. We all are together that there are 5 interlocking injustices that we must address in policy: systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, denial of health care, the war economy, militarization of our communities, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. But what makes this moment very, very powerful is the agenda that has united us. And now in our anchor groups, we have represented more than 60 million constituents. If someone would put up the flyer, this flyer that shows our anchor groups. When you look at that flyer, member of the media, from the Poor People's Campaign, all of the states, more than 30-some states that have coordinating committees, and when you look at the AFL-CIO and the National Council of Churches, and you look at the list of people, Common Cause, the Disciples of Christ, the Presbyterian Church, the AME Zion Church, the Unitarian Church, if you go down that list, when you put all of those folk together, those groups, these anchor groups that have all united together, represent more than 60 million constituents. And what is bringing us together? Why are we coming together? We're coming together around this collective agreement that the following principles must be addressed. What we really ought to be talking about in our political debates, at our political conventions, what ought to be put on the table, and where people ought to know we stand, and where politicians who seek the votes of persons. Now that poor and low-wage people represent 30% of the electorate, and up to 42 to 43% of the electorate in so-called battleground states. We're talking about 87 million voters, 50-some-7 million voted the last time, some 30 million didn't, and we're talking about 15 million infrequent poor and low-wage voters. We're talking about the fact that in most battleground states where the margin of victory was within 3%, if just 3 to 4% of poor and low-wage voters that did not vote were to be mobilized around the agenda to vote, they could close the margins of victory in the 2020 election. That is huge. In places like Wisconsin, it would take only 1% of these voters. In Michigan, only 1%. In Pennsylvania, where there are 3+ million poor and low-wage voters, if you look at the margin of victory up there, it would only take about 3%. In North Carolina, it would take somewhere between 17 and 18%. We're not talking about having to move 50, 60%, but small percentages of persons could change. And what are we saying? What is drawing us? Why are poor and low-wage folk and moral leaders saying we must go offensive? We must make our voices heard.
Why is it that when poor and low-wage people say the number one reason they don't vote is nobody talks to them? Well, now it's time for them to make people hear them. It's because of this agenda that unites us, that we're saying to every politician, every convention, if you want our votes, if you want them, we want to know where you stand on abolishing poverty as the fourth leading cause of death in the United States. Where do you stand on a living minimum wage of at least $15 an hour indexed with inflation? Where do you stand on full and expanded voting rights? Where do you stand on no more voter suppression? Where do you stand on guaranteed workers' rights, labor rights, and union rights? Where do you stand on health care for all? Where do you stand on affordable, adequate housing? Where do you stand on strong social welfare and safety net program? Where do you stand on an end to gun violence, profit, and proliferation of guns? Where do you stand on fully protected women's rights? Where do you stand on environmental justice that secures clean air and water and land? Where do you stand on justice for our indigenous brothers and sisters, indigenous nations? Sig, if you could put the real flyer up there that shows the Capitol in the background. Where do you stand on fully funded public education? Where do you stand on just immigration laws? Where do you stand on addressing militarism and the war economy? Where do you stand for peace, not war, and calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza that allows immediate humanitarian release and a release of all hostages? Peace and justice be pursued. And where do you stand on an end to genocide around the world, wherever it exists? Where do you stand on an end to hate, division, and the extremist political agenda? Those are the agendas, those 17 agendas that have drawn this powerful coalition together that is calling for poor and low-wage voters to exercise their right to vote. Our votes are not for persons, but for demands. We know the power of our vote. We know that it can impact who's elected and the policies at the state, the federal, and the local level. Again, 30% of the electorate in America now is poor and low wage. In so-called battleground states, over 40%. Poverty and low wages that is abolishable and unnecessary. We are demanding that it be at the center of our political debate, at the center of our discussions and what our conventions talk about. If we put more money to benefit union labor rights for workers rather than more money than blowing up the world, we can literally change the world. So we can no longer accept poverty, low income being the fourth leading cause of death. Media, please hear this, 800 people a day. When COVID got to 500 people a day, 300 people a day, we call it an epidemic. 800 people a day are dying from poverty and low wages, 295,000 people a year. More than 50 million working people work for less than $15 an hour. 87 million people are uninsured or underinsured. Millions are on the brink of homelessness. Thousands who want education but can't afford it. This is why we are writing, and today we're announcing that we're going to write both sides of the Congress to call on them to have a vote before November on at least these three things: on raising the minimum wage to at least $17 an hour indexed with inflation. There ought to be a vote on that before November. They should vote on voting rights, expanding and protecting voting rights and restoring the Voting Rights Act and expanding access to the ballot. They should vote on expanding Medicaid and returning people back. It makes no sense that in somewhere, for instance, like Pennsylvania, some 800,000 people have been kicked off of the expansion that some of them experienced and had during COVID. We will call on in writing for both sides to take up these issues. We're not talking about a particular bill right now because we don't have, but to take up the issue and let poor and low wage people, this massive voting bloc, know where you stand, not what you've done, but where you stand and what you will do if your party, if your group gets the majority. We need to know. We're also going to write all of the networks, and we will sign the networks. Reverend Liz and I have said for a long time that our debates are too puny. We talk about a lot of things, but not the things that impact. We had 16 debates in the last presidential election. Not one of them took up seriously how candidates would deal with 40% of the electorate, because 40% of the population poor and low wealth. And then finally, as we join together with all of our partners, we're going to make this known. We're going to say to the networks, you have a debate 2 days before our gathering. Poor and low-wage people and their issues should be centered in that debate. We must elevate how we are interviewing candidates, that they don't get to skirt the issues, the life and death issues that are affecting the 135 million poor and low-wage people in this country. This is where we are. This is why we're gathering. This is why we have the massive voter mobilization campaign. And this is why we are adding partners every day. Today, we announced that the United Church of Christ is coming on as a partner with us, an anchor partner, and joining in mobilizing in a powerful way. We announced that the community action programs have called, the CAP agencies, and they are deeply looking at it, joining on and bringing all of those persons as well to bear, not only on the gathering in June, but in the work that must go on, that we must do, because nobody else is going to do it with us. We will be releasing a full list and a list of all of the various leaders, state poor and low wage coordinating committees, tri-chairs, and then the other leaders, to the media and to the public, because we want you to know that there is a meeting in Washington, D.C., there's a meeting at the polls, and we ought to all be there in a massive way, because it is time for a resurrection, a nonviolent resurrection, love, justice, and truth-telling, and not a violent insurrection of lies, division, and hate. Yeah. At this time, I want to call on some people who are really the voice of the movement. They are the voice of the movement. And I want to interview with them for a second so they can say why they are spending time mobilizing like never before, both in terms of folk coming to Washington, D.C., and also they are mobilizing for people to build up the 7,000 people we need in 35 states to engage in this massive outreach to the 15 million poor and low-wage voters. So the first person we have, Joyce, are you on this morning?
I'm on, Reverend.
Joyce, it is good to see you. I know you've had some struggles like we all are, but you're still in the battle. You're still in the battle. You know, you said to us, why is it? You had a particular reason that you, Joyce Kendrick from Ohio, said, look, I'm going to do everything I can to mobilize and get folk from Ohio to DC, but also to mobilize, 200-300 people in your state to do the massive outreach we need to do to the vote. What is it that's moving you, Joyce?
Well, I mean, I'm only one of 4,057,000 people living in poverty here in Ohio.
Wow.
I've been involved with this campaign for a little over 3 years now, impacted by poverty myself. Just last year, just a few months ago, I became a widow. My husband died 6 days before his 57th birthday, and he died of poverty. He had a swollen leg, and we had made a doctor appointment, and we went to the doctor, ready to go, and we were sent home because we didn't have a $35 copay.
So, but Joyce, I want you to. So you went to the doctor, and for $35, just $35, they said we won't treat you. Okay.
No, they told him to keep an eye on his leg and come back on Monday. And over the weekend, we were able to borrow that money, and we're planning on going to the doctor. And Jeff is my husband's name, Jeff Kendrick, said that he was feeling a little tired and he's going to go lay his head down on the desk and take a little nap before we went. When I went to wake him up 90 minutes later to take him to the appointment, my husband was dead.
Yeah. Yeah, we know, Joyce. We've dealt with. Yes, Lord.
Lack of $35. If they had, it was a blood clot. in his leg. That was what was happening with his leg. If they had seen him on Friday and taken care of that, I would not be a widow today. But he was only one, Reverend. He was only one of 700 of 800 people. 799 other people died that day, along with Jeff, because of poverty.
That's right.
And we're not going to take this. I'm not taking that anymore. And we can't. You know, we're going to speak up. It's unnecessary. This is the richest nation in the world. And we can't ensure that people are getting paid living wages and that they have medical insurance to take care of things like this.
I know, Joyce, one time we were talking and you said that, you know, really the healthcare should not be pertaining to what kind of job you should have just for being a human being.
Absolutely. It's a right. It's a human right for everybody. Like I said, especially here, Reverend, especially in this country. There's no excuse for people to be dying because they didn't have $35 to pay the doctor.
That's right. Say that number one more time at the beginning. You said how many folk in Ohio? Because I want the media to hear it from you. In Ohio, there
in
are
Ohio, 4,057,660 voters living in poverty in this state alone.
And the last question: what does it make you feel like when you turn on the TV and you see these debates and they talk about who went to trial, they talk about who got convicted, they talk about insults, they talk about tax cuts, but you don't hear them reference the 4 million people specifically. How does that make you feel as an impacted person?
I have never heard poverty come up in any of these debates, on any of these news programs, unless we see people who are activists and doing something, you know, like you, and like us, you know, and people with our voice. But this is something that people just are not talking about, and it's impacting so many people. It's not making us uncomfortable. We're dying. People are dying. And this is an issue that is just being ignored, and we need to bring it to the front and center.
Right. Well, Joyce, you're going to be there and you're going to be speaking and you're going to lift your story up. You know, I had to tell somebody the other day, they said, well, you know, you don't want to use the word poor because poor people don't want us to use that word. And I said, no, what poor people don't want you, what they want you to do is stop making it so that poverty is a reality, because it doesn't have to be. And
Absolutely.
So, Joyce, you know, we've been praying with you and standing with you in the honor of your husband. You said you were going to mobilize and keep moving, and we love you and we thank God for you. We look forward to seeing you and the nation hearing you as well. Thank you. Anita Kinsley is from Durham, Pennsylvania. You know, it's a Durham, North Carolina. Anita, why is it that you in Pennsylvania have said in this season, this moment, I'm going to be a part of mobilizing poor and low-wage voters, and we're not going to sit on the sideline, and I'm going to mobilize to make a difference. Anita, talk to the media about why. Anita Kinsley from Durham, Pennsylvania.
So, there's about 800,000 Pennsylvanians who've been cut off of healthcare in the last year. I've met many of them. I might be one of them soon.
Now, is that from they got cut? They got on during the part of the pandemic, and then when they changed the rules, they've been knocked off. That's the group you're talking about.
Yep, both parties agreed that that people who were covered during the pandemic are no longer able to be covered. They're doing renewals again, and most of the people who are being cut off for bureaucratic reasons, for no good reason.
That's right. That's right. And you're hearing across the state, how is that making people feel that you're talking to? And why is it that in this moment, you all are saying, well, we're not just going to cry about it, we're going to organize about it, we're going to fight back about it?
People, once they realize we have the ability to change things, that can really change how people are looking at the situation, how we relate to one another. We're not just, we're not divided on these various lines of urban and rural, or based on the color line, or, trans or whatever, right? We all need healthcare, and we are being denied healthcare, sometimes at the cost of our lives, right?
What is it? You're right. It doesn't matter whether you're trans or straight or gay or black or white. Cancer doesn't care about those things. Sickness doesn't care about those things. What does it mean? What does it mean to you when you find out? Because until our campaign started bringing it up, people weren't talking about that. In your state, for instance, the presidential election was decided by 40,000 votes, and then you hear that there are 3.4 million poor and low wage voters that didn't vote, and if just 2-3% of them were to vote, it could change everything, all of the calculations. What does that say to you? How does that motivate you to get to organize?
I mean, that really shows the power, right? There's a lot of national attention in Pennsylvania at the moment, right? So if those people could be made to vote, sorry, I'm at work.
That's all right.
But if we could realize the strength we have, right? That's national politics could be decided by us.
That's right. That's right. Well, I know you're at work, and folk media needs to hear that. The folk are working and fighting and struggling, but what we're not doing is giving up. Well, thank you from Pennsylvania. Forward together, man. Not one step back. Forward together. Joan from Wisconsin. Joan Wheeler from Wisconsin, PPC.
Hello, Reverend Barber.
Hey, Joan. Well, your state, and Liz is from there, and they tell me that the election was last time 20,000 votes, but over 1 million poor and low wage voters, infrequent voters that didn't vote, and if just 1 or 2% of them could be mobilized. What does that say to you? Why are you working so hard? I've heard y'all are really putting in the work up there. Why are you pushing so hard?
Yes, we got our sleeves rolled up, Reverend Barber. We're mobilizing to get out the vote because there are 1.9 million poor and low income eligible voters here, and they make up 39% of the electorate. And if we could get those low income and poor eligible voters to vote, if we can get them to go to the polls the way the higher income voters do, then we can have the power to sway the outcomes. And that can go across all these states. And we can really change the outcomes of these elections.
I detect a little church voice in your voice.
Yes, sir. I'm an evangelist.
That's what I hear. And there's a scripture in the Bible, you remember, where the lepers said, why will we just sit here and die?
Yes, sir.
We sit here. We need to get up and go toward the city. And they said by the time they got to the city, they sounded like thunder. In some ways, are you saying to people, listen, we can sit here and say what folk are not doing, they're not talking to us, or we can organize our power both massively on June the 29th in DC, and then through the power of the vote, and refuse to die, refuse to be quiet. Is that part of your message?
That's what I'm saying, Reverend Barber. The scripture says, as they went, they were healed. So we have to put our foot, we have to step out on faith. We have to go. And in the going, that's where the strength comes from. And that's where the power comes from. When we march forward.
Well, we're so say that number again so the media can hear how many poor.
It's 1.9 million. It's 1.9 million. And if we can influence those people to vote, then we can make a big change.
And the majority in Wisconsin are white, by the way. Not that it matters.
That's correct.
But we like to make sure, because oftentimes people want to act like poverty is only a brown and black problem, when it is in fact a problem of the entire country.
That's correct. Actually, when we go to our meetings, we're actually in the minority.
Okay. In Wisconsin, that's right. That's right. Well, listen, you keep on telling folk that as they went, they were healed. And so we've got to go. We cannot just sit here and die. Thank you,
Reverend Barber, if I could just say,
Go
If
ahead.
you would,
Go ahead.
if you would allow me, please, we're
Sure.
really mobilizing because today it's like the clock has been turned back to 1968 when Dr.
Wow.
King was mobilizing the Poor People's March, and we're resurrecting that, because our country has totally forgotten that it's not being judged. We're not being judged by how we treat the wealthy, but we're being judged by how we treat the poor. And so we're not an insurrection, but we're a resurrection.
Wow, that's exactly right. And in this sense, actually, while there's more poverty, the strange thing in the midst of that is that the stones that the builders rejected now have all this power, but we can't leave it on the table. We've got to
Yes,
use
sir.
it. We got it. Well, thank you, John. Thank you, and keep on. We look to see you on the 29th, and then hear you on the line. And are you getting people that want to sign up? The media needs to know. We're trying to mobilize 200 people that can do this outreach. Are you all finding that people are wanting to say, yes, I want to be a part of doing everything I can to help mobilize folks?
Yes, sir. We're signing up people to get on the bus. We're signing up people to tell their stories.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Katie Lawson from North Carolina. Katie, are you on?
I am.
Katie, talk to this media today from all over the country. Tell them who you are, if you want to, what kind of work you do or what kind of work you may not be. But why is it, Katie Lawson, why is Katie Lawson working so hard to mobilize folk for this mass gathering in DC, but also to get people to join this effort to call, text, tweet, knock on doors, to get as many poor and low-wage voters that have not been voting to vote, especially in North Carolina, where all you would need is 18% of those who have to change that. Why are you doing this, Katie?
I'm doing this because we need that 18%. I work for, I'm representing the Exodus Missionary United Church of Christ, but I also work with the Exodus Ministries in Hickory, North Carolina. And I work primarily with homeless people that are coming into the program. I also work with justice-involved individuals who are coming out of prison, who are coming out off post-release and parole. And as a justice-involved individual, I can say the first time that I voted was in 2020.
Wow.
So yes, so I'm encouraging and showing these people, what the power of their vote can do, because we know that justice-involved individuals have a harder time finding jobs, finding housing. Homeless people, just the same, with the minimum wage at $7.25 in North Carolina, and the average one-bedroom apartment in this county being about $1,000 a month. We see a high homeless population, and we're going to continue to see a high homeless population and a high prison recidivism rate.
Did you just say that the minimum wage is the low, but you said $1,000 a month in Hickory? Wow.
Yes.
$1,000 a month for a basic apartment. So basically, if you're working full time, you still can't afford it.
Right. I work too. I have a full-time job, a part-time job, and I own my own cleaning business. And I'm scraping by.
What do you say to people, last question, who say, well, you got a part-time job, you got a full-time job, you got your own business. That's what you're supposed to do. Just pull yourself up by your own bootstrap. Don't worry about how high the minimum wage is. What do you say to folks that talk like that?
I tell them, look, I was there, and I'm one bad decision from being there again. So I'm going to continue to support my community, and I'm going to fight for my people that I work with on a daily basis, so that they can do better and so that I can do better. That's
right. Well, thank you for what you do. I know you were a part of the effort that gave 40-some thousand formerly justice-involved persons their rights back. And then, they've tried to take it back, but you've been a part of that fight from the beginning. And we thank you for all you do and look forward to you mobilizing as many people as possible. Lastly, I'm in Charlotte, and we've got Brother Dupree with the airport workers down here are mobilizing because they don't just want the planes to take off, they want their benefits to take off. They want their living wages to take off. They don't want to be in a place where the planes fly, but their wages crash. And so, Brother Dupree, talk to us about why, as a part of this effort, USSW, working with SEIU, working the union movement, why you all are mobilizing towards DC and mobilizing toward the vote.
Hey, actually, my name is LaShonda Barber.
Oh, LaShonda, you changed that. Okay, hey, LaShonda, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good.
Talk to the media about why you're engaged.
Okay, so first of all, I'm LaShonda Barber. I'm a high-level driver here at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. I've been working at the company for 4 years, a little over 4 years, really, and at the airport itself over 17 years. And I'm here fighting to make change for our subcontractors. I'm gonna start there. I am a high-level driver. I cater, I'm a subcontractor for American Airlines, who makes so much money. I'm a caregiver for my son, who's 18, who fit to graduate next week, which is, I'm so proud of him as a single parent, raising him. And I also help my mother, take care of my mother, who's been living with me over 12 years now.
So you're real, you got it all. You're taking care of your mama, you're taking care of your son, he's graduating, you don't mind working, but what you have a problem with is the airline making all this money and then not sharing the profits with the folk.
No, they definitely not sharing profits at all. The CEO of American Airlines make over $15,000 an hour, which is sad because that's like maybe good 4 months that I have to work just to get that much money. Like strong working, overtime working just to get that much money.
And so the CEO, and then the CEO doesn't want to make sure that you all have the kind of wages benefits that you should have. So workers, airline workers are mobilizing, right? You all have an action tomorrow. Talk about it.
Yes, we do have an action tomorrow. We trying to get but everybody to know that we what we're going through here at airport all across the country, not just our airport, it's all the airports across the country. We're trying to get property wages up because we getting scraps. We tired of getting scraps. We need health care. We need paid sick time off because during COVID, they was giving out so much money, but we didn't get it. All we got was 50 cents at my company. And a lot of companies didn't get none at all. They've just put money in their pockets.
Wait a minute. I want to go back to that so the media can hear that. You've been working there how long?
Over 4 years.
Over 4 years. And during COVID, with all the money supposedly going, and corporations got 68% of all the COVID dollars, and you said that you got what?
I only got 50 cents. Well, all the workers only got 50 cents. That's it. Just 50 cents. And we was front line. We was on the planes with the passengers who had COVID. And so many people who got COVID that worked with me, they was out of work and they didn't get paid a penny for quarantine. So they were just out of work with no money, can't pay their bills. And there's so many people who's already homeless that work with me and they short, like really sleeping in their cars or in the hotel, in hotel rooms or either inside the airport because they can't afford anything.
So I want the media to hear this because you're coming to DC and a part of this mass mobilization. And these are the stories that America often doesn't hear. And they ought to, the candidates ought to be asked questions like just about this that you're hearing now. You got black and white, all kinds of people working, right? Yes. I just heard, let me make sure that the media, I'm make sure they hear what you said. Are you saying that there are folk who are in this airline work, they come to work, and we see them when we catch planes and whatnot, but their reality is some of them have to go to a hotel, a cheap hotel. Some of them have to park their car to sleep, and some of them stay in the airport and sleep and then go back to work.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, and the sad thing about it is, like 2 years ago, I had a coworker who actually got fired because he smelled, but he was homeless. He didn't have nowhere really to go to actually cleanse up. before coming to work. And that was the hardest part, like, wow. So when the union, our SEIU 32BJ came, asking, do we want to get a union? It meant so much to me because so many people needed the backbone to help make our stories heard.
That's right. Well, my sister, this is what we've got to hear. This is what's got to motivate us. And we've got so much power that we've got to get federal laws. There's no way in the world these minimum wages should be $7.25. There's no way in the world healthcare should not be for all. And it's people like you and folk on the job, and that brother that if you can find him, if y'all know where he is, please bring him to DC. Please get him, because his story needs to be told, and it's what needs to motivate folk to say to these candidates, if you want our votes, you need to tell us how you gonna fix these things and what your idea, do you line up with this agenda? Because we cannot continue to see this going on. None of what you have heard this morning, members of the media, about these Americans, none of these human beings, God's children, God's creation, nothing that you've heard this morning can't be corrected. It's not, we can't correct it if we have the moral consciousness to correct it, and we exercise our political power to make sure people are elected who will not pass it by, take it for granted, or ignore it. We are a resurrection and not an insurrection, and we must be with all of the folk coming here. Let me thank each of you for your testimony so the media can hear from you. We are sending your names to all of them so that they can quote you, because that's most important, that we put a face on this. Now we're going to hear a recording from our dear friend, Fred Redmond with the AFL-CIO, and what he has said about why the AFL-CIO and its millions of members are mobilizing it this morning. And then we're going to ask Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis, our co-chair, to respond to what she's heard, as she is a tremendous leader and galvanizer, been doing this work for years and years and years, as she has heard this morning from you and from Fred, and what she wants to say to the members of the media as well, and then we'll take questions. Could y'all play that from Fred?
Thank you. I am Fred Redmond, the Secretary-Treasurer of the AFL-CIO. We're a federation of 60 national unions representing 12.5 million working people in every state and territory and in all parts of our economy. We are honored, and we are committed to come together with Bishop Barber and Dr. Theoharis and the Poor People's Campaign and our partners in the faith and civil rights and social justice movements to mobilize working people and use our collective voice to demand an end to systemic economic injustice and this scourge of poverty. The American labor movement, we fight for all working people and their families. We fight injustice in our communities and at work, and we are committed to vanquishing oppression in all of its forms. And look, there is no greater form of oppression than when a country with immense resources and wealth allows its people to suffer and die from a lack of resources. Poverty is a failure of the system. It exists because we allow it to exist. And Dr. King knew that. He saw poverty for what it was, a moral failing of our government. A government that allows its people to go hungry, to live unsheltered, to live sick or injured without access to health care. It is a morally bankrupt government. A nation, Dr. King said, cannot be a great nation if it is not a compassionate nation, if it cannot care for or concern itself with the nation's most vulnerable. It does not allow for the full humanity of every single person within its borders. Workers' rights, civil rights, and human rights are on the ballot this election. And America's voters will decide if we're going to stay the course and keep on this path toward a more compassionate government or revert back to its morally bankrupt nation. Look, the American labor movement is committed to registering, mobilizing union members and union families around the mass mobilization on June the 29th. And we're going to elect lawmakers who will advocate for workers and poor people, to elect leaders who will put people over profits, protect our democracy, and advance worker and civil and human rights. Look, together, we can put an end to poverty and create a more compassionate nation. And together, we will do just that. Forward together, not one step back. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Redmond.
Well,
Thank
that was a powerful word. We've been hearing some powerful words this morning. And indeed, we are living in a morally bankrupt society when Joyce Kendrick's husband could die because they didn't have a $35 copay. We are living in a morally bankrupt society when workers all over the country, including there in Charlotte, North Carolina, are organizing and making sure that people hear about the conditions that so many low-wage workers are experiencing across this country. We are living in a morally bankrupt society when we hear from Joan Wheeler about what's going on in Wisconsin and how people are organizing and fighting back, or we hear from Anita in Pennsylvania about the 21 million people in this country who have been pushed off of Medicaid just in the last year alone. But that's why we are going to be there in Washington, D.C. on June 29th, hearing these voices, hearing these stories, but also hearing the solutions, hearing the demands that the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, and all of the different partners have to actually put forward real solutions to the problems that are facing us. And so we know that with everybody organizing and mobilizing across this country right now, we're going to make sure we make a big noise and make sure that people see the kind of power that is building, and that's going to go right into that election where we wake the sleeping giant of poor and low income, low propensity voters. And so it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be able to respond to these powerful testimonies, the very heroes and heroines that this country needs to organize and lift from the bottom so everybody rises. And so thanks for having me here on this press call today. And may we all organize powerfully to make sure that these stories are not disappeared, they're not silenced or silent, but in fact, our society has to hear them. We make them hear them so that we can change things for the better for everybody.
That's all right. Liz, all right. I don't know what happened to my, oh, there it is.
You're good. Yeah, you're good.
But Liz, what is that phrase for the me that you often say about a force?
Well, this new and unsettling force,
That's
right?
That's right.
That when poor and low income people organize together, unite together, we all can be a new and unsettling force in our complacent national life, right? I mean, we have gotten complacent in this society. How you were talking about, Bishop Barber, right? The last presidential election, not a debate focused on the predicament of 40% of the US population, 800 people dying a day, and somehow we're complacent to the fact that poverty is one of the leading causes of death. And in this national life where we're not talking about the kinds of real issues that are impacting people, we got to unsettle that. And poor and low income people, especially when we vote and voice our demands, at that polls and in our communities, we can actually, we can unsettle this, and we can then push forward the kind of real solutions that we need.
That's right. And we want folk to know we believe in voter mobilization. When necessary, we believe in action. We believe in legislation. We believe in litigation. In other words, we're going to fight with every tool Marley is handed to us. We don't have to use the weapons of evil to do good, but we are a force. And reason I want you also to bring that up is the third announcement we're making is that on Thursday of the week leading up to the 29th, which is actually the 27th, there will be a releasing of the short film documentary done by Dara Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Dara and Reverend Liz and Ross Pellis will co-lead that. It's going to be a premiere in DC, and it's the first time, Liz, I think, that this has been done. It tells the story of this rendition of the Poor People's Campaign since 2017, and it ends kind of leading like, where do we go? But it's powerful because it's focused on the voices, and it's going to be a part of our mobilization on the 29th. It will happen on the 27th. Members of the media, you all will hear that more about it, and we're going to invite members of the media to see this new movie. And it's actually entitled An Unsettling Force, done by a premier documentarian who's done work all across the world, including in South Africa. You'll hear more about that when we come. So, Joe, if there are any questions from the media for myself, for Liz, or for others, we'll take them now.
Yep. Thank you, Reverend Barber, Reverend Theo Harris, and thanks, members of the media who are here. If you raise your hand in the chat, we'll give you access to ask your questions, or you can drop your questions in the Q&A. We do have one from Bob Henley, so we'll go ahead and unmute you, Bob, so you can ask your question.
Yes, thank you very much. So Reverend Barber, if you could just, I know that you all had a study done by Columbia University of this sleeping giant, the low-wage, low-wealth voting cohort, and they looked at particularly 2016. And I would just say that this is the kind of attention and professional study that we see done exclusively almost by the corporate media of suburbia. Can you just refresh our recollection about that, about what we heard from the voters that were studied about why they didn't participate?
Yeah, thank you, Bob. And one of the things that Dr. Theo Harris and I push is that when you're in a movement, you need to have footnotes. You need to footnote your arguments. You don't just need to be loud. You need to be loud and right. And oftentimes we have to do our own studies because so much has been missaid, misinterpreted. For instance, before we started pushing, they said only 39 million poor and low-wage people in the country, but the numbers were wrong. The measurement was wrong. It was 140 million. Then you hear people saying things like poor people don't vote, or poor white folk vote against their own interests. Well, we did a study by Attorney Shally Gupta Barnes was a leader in pulling that study together with the professor from Columbia University, who does this work all the time. And here's the basics that the media should know. You can get it, Google it, called Waking the Sleeping Giant, study done by the Poor People's Campaign. And here's some of the executive points. Number one, poor and low-wage people do vote. 57 million voted at the election. 30 million didn't. There are over 87 million poor elected voters. The problem is, number two, is that poor and low-wage voters don't vote at the same percentage that more wealthy voters. In this electorate, there are a lot of people who don't vote, and we still have a lot that don't go to the polls. But the difference the study pointed out was the percentage between more affluent voters and poor and low-wage. Secondly, the study showed that the number one reason out of when they were asked, why don't you vote, was no one talks to us, particularly the politicians. They do not talk to us. It wasn't voter suppression. It wasn't we don't have a ride or can't get off work. Now, those things were said, but they were not the number one thing. The number one thing was nobody talks to us. Number three, the study showed that poor and low-wage voters across the nation represent 30% of the electorate at least. And in so-called battleground states, and by battleground, the study looked at states where the margin of victory was 3% or less, and Texas where it was 5% or less. In those states, poor and low-wage voters represent upwards of 42, 43% of the electorate. And in a couple of places as high as 45, 46%. And then lastly, the study revealed that in key states where the margin of victory was in the thousands, something like just anywhere between 1 and 3% of poor and low wage voters that did not vote If they could be mobilized around an agenda to vote, they would outdistance that margin of victory. Pennsylvania, if you go across, I could talk about all of them, but just take these four. Wisconsin, 20,000 votes, over 1 million poor and low wage voters didn't vote. Michigan, 10,000 vote margin, over 1 million voters didn't vote. Pennsylvania, 40,000 vote margin, somewhere upwards of 1 to 3.5 million didn't vote. North Carolina, 160,000, something near 1 million poor and low wage voters didn't vote. When you look at it that way, Bob, it tells a story that we don't hear in the major media. We should be hearing it, but we don't hear it. And that's why we did this study. And that's why when we say we're going to mobilize 7,000 activists in 35 states, 200 per state, that if you got 200 people in 35 states to touch 45 voters a day, using the big basic technology that we have, and they did that over an 8-week period, you would actually reach over 15 million people in that period of time. Any other questions?
If there's any other questions, raise your hand and we'll give you speaking access.
All right, well, Joe, if you would, could you or Sid call out the other states that are having press conferences today, and we'll close this out.
Yep, I can call those out. So this other states that are having simultaneous press conferences include Delaware, Indiana, Kentucky, Maryland, Massachusetts, Mississippi, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Texas, and West Virginia.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. Joe, we'll let you close out. Thank you to all the members of the media. This has been taped, I do believe. Am I correct, Joe? And
yes.
So we'll be able to push it out. It'll be on the website, Kairos website, Repair's website, Poor People's Campaign website. And so you can access it for your stories and push it to other colleagues in the media. Thank you all so much. And as we say, forward together, not one step back.
Thank you, Reverend Barber, and thank you everyone for attending. And if there's any other questions from the media, you can email me, jward@breachrepairs.org. Thank you so much for attending today's press briefing. Bye all.
Bye, Joe. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank